Hello, it's Tuesday, May 19th, and for today's video, I want to talk about a common issue in writing, and that's the concept of subject-verb agreement. And when I say subject-verb agreement, I'm talking about the idea that a singular subject needs to be paired with a singular tense verb. Likewise, a plural subject with a plural verb. And this often becomes a problem as writers start to write more complex sentences, as the subject gets farther away from the verb, or as writers start to use phrases and types of sentence structures where they have more than one subject introduced into a sentence. It starts to cause issues, right? So that sometimes they'll have a singular subject, and because of the way it's written, they'll use a plural verb. So if you're someone who has handed in something and you've gotten it back with something circled that says subject-verb agreement, and you've wondered why or how to fix it, hopefully this video will clarify it. I'm going to go over 10 different rules for that, and hopefully after those 10 rules, you'll have a better understanding of it. Somewhere in this general vicinity here, I hope to have a, typed up spot where you can see the rules as I go through them, and that way you can pause it and study them a little bit easier if you need to. And let's just get right into it. So our first rule with subject-verb agreement is that when a subject is in a phrase that has of in it, the subject's going to come before the word of, the OF, right? And this causes a lot of issues for students because what tends to happen is they look at all of the words in the phrase, the subject, and what comes after of. And if the words that come after of contain a noun that's plural, what tends to happen is students are tempted to use a plural form of the verb. So let's say that we had a school of children, right? People will see children and they might be, tempted to put a plural form of the verb in there, but we have to look at the word school. School is our subject. Or a flock of birds, right? You see the word birds, you see the S, it's plural, so you're tempted to use a plural verb. But you use flock, and because of the type of word flock is, you use a singular form of the verb. So that's one that oftentimes becomes an issue. And that's what you have to look for. Make sure you're focusing on the subject, which is going to come before the word of, before the OF in the sentence. All right, so number two is, again, it's another situation where, due to the way the sentence is structured, someone who's writing sees that there is more than one subject physically in the sentence, and therefore is inclined to change the verb to make it a plural form. And this is when you use or either or neither nor. If you're using those words with two singular subjects, you have to use the singular form of the verb. So if you have two singular things connected with or, either or neither nor, you still use a singular form of the verb. And again, it gets confusing because people, as they're writing, they say two things. So let's say John or Tom is going to take me to the movies, right? Because I'm saying John or Tom, I'm using the single form is. It gets confusing because people, again, see two people, but because it's one or the other. They're two singular things, and I'm choosing one of those. That's why you keep that singular form. That's rule number two. Now, rule number three is very closely related to this. If you're, again, using or, either or neither nor, but one of those subjects is plural, you use the word closest to the verb. So let's say, small child at the door. Let's say you have Tom or my sisters are going to take me to the movie. Because sisters is plural and it's closer to the verb, I'm going to use the plural form of the verb. But if I switched it, my sisters or Tom is going to take me to the movies. Because Tom is closer to the verb in that sentence structure, I'm going to use the single form. So for rule three, if you're connecting with or either or, and you have one of those that's plural, you're going to go with the one that's closest to the verb to decide which tense you're going to use for your noun. All right, so number four, is when you're connecting subjects with and, right? So if you have Tom and John, right? Because I'm saying and, now we're making it plural. I'm going to use a plural form of the verb. John and Tom are taking me to the movies. Again, and is combining the two, so now it's not singular, it's plural. So whenever you're combining subjects with and, you're going to use the plural form of the verb, right? And that one's relatively easier to understand because of that. And again, that's a general rule, right? Tom and John are, all right? So again, if you're combining subjects with and, you're gonna use a plural form. Number 5 has 2 different parts, and this can get a little tricky here, so bear with me. So 5A, we'll call it. If they're being separated by as well as, or besides, or not, you're going to use a singular verb, right? You're going to ignore what's in that little thing. So if I said John as well as Tom, I'm going to use the singular form, right? So John as well as Tom is going to go to the movies, right? So we just ignore the as well as part. That little phrase that's in the middle, that's introduced with as well as or besides, right? Those types of little phrases, we ignore those. We focus on the first part for when we're determining which type of verb we use, right? So we focus on that. For 5B, similarly, if there's things in parentheses, we ignore that too, right? So if we have a sentence and we're going to put something in parentheses, we ignore what's in the parentheses when determining what type of sentence we're going to use, or what type of verb, sorry. So if you find that in doing that, it makes the sentence a little awkward, there's always the option to rewrite the sentence to either get rid of the parentheses or the as well as, and try to combine them so that it fits more naturally. Because sometimes things are grammatically correct, but can sound a little awkward to the ear. So you always have the option to rearrange the sentence to get rid of that. But 5A, if you have as well as or besides, stick with the first noun and keep it singular. If you have it in parentheses, we ignore what's in the parentheses. So that's going to get us to 6, I believe. If we're starting a sentences with here or there, this is where it gets really difficult for people. The subject isn't going to come until after the verb. Now, typically when we start learning about grammar, we tend to think of the subject as coming first, right? Being in the first part of the sentence. But if we have here or there to start off our sentence, we're going to look for our subject after the verb. So, there are 4 batteries in the flashlight, right? The subject is the flashlight, right? So we have to look at that. There is a high hurdle to jump, right? Is hurdle, right? So you have to think about that. It gets confusing at first when you think about it, when you first look at those, because we tend to think of the subject as always having to come first. When we use it like that, it's going to come at the end. 7, when you're using a singular verb with distances or periods of time or sums of money, they're typically considered as a unit. So 3 miles is too far, right? $5 is too much. Even though you might say to yourself, $5, that's more than one, it's plural, we're considering it a whole unit. We wouldn't say $5 are too much. So we use it as a singular verb in those cases for miles, currency, and so forth like that. So that's, again, particularly for people who are just learning the language, that one can be very tricky to get. So rule number 8, words that indicate portions, like a lot, the majority, some, all. Typically what happens in there, you look for the subject. In that case, is like a reversal of the first rule. The subject is going to come after the of in this case when you use a lot, some, the majority, right? So a lot of people, right? In this case, people is going to be the subject and it's coming up. So those words kind of change the rule when you have those used in there. So all of the pie is gone, right? A majority of people like dogs as pets, right? So that gives a little bit of a change there. So typically, if the noun after is singular, you use a singular verb and so forth. So that rule gets a little tricky considering the first one. Again, that's why it helps to have them presented up here. Rule number 9 is collective nouns. And again, collective nouns is a concept that can be a little bit more difficult for people who are just learning the language and can throw them off. So hopefully this will help as well. You know, group, jury, things like that, family, audience, even though the word means more than one, we refer to them as singular typically, all right? We typically refer to those as singular. The jury has arrived, right? The audience is seated, right? So that can sometimes get people a little confused, and for an obvious reason. There are some times though when people change it for author's intent, right? So if they want to change meaning, they can change it. So that one gets a little bit more confusing depending on the rule, and that's where we come into one with the word none. None is a really difficult one because that's gone back and forth. And you know, when I started thinking about doing this video, one of the things I read was that in SATs, that the SAT had decided to consider none part of strictly singular, I believe, is the new rule. So SATs, for their point of grading, consider none singular, right? That's it. Even though most dictionaries and most grammar guides can consider it both singular and plural. And if you were to look into the whole history of it, you'd find it used both ways as far back, I think, you know, it's at the beginning of modern English. So SATs consider none a singular noun. So it's something to keep in considering. Number 10, the word were replaces was in a sentence. You know, that can be a difficult one to express a wish contrary to fact. So we're talking about like subjunctive things here. So you're talking about something that could happen. So like, if my cat were here, he would be crawling all over me. Now, this gets confusing because cat is singular and were sounds like the plural version, but because I'm talking about something that is something that could happen, like in the future, I use were. Right? If my dad were to find out that I didn't wear a coat when it was cold outside, he would be mad. Right? So in those cases, for the subjunctive mood case, we want to make sure we use were in that, which again, that's one of those that becomes difficult at first, particularly for English language learners, but that's why I want to have it typed up here so you can refer back to that. And I think that should cover most of it. I know this is a long video, but it's a difficult thing to get at first, and it's one of those things that as you start to write more and more and think about those rules a couple of times at first, you just get better at it naturally. But, you know, it takes a couple of times of thinking about the rules before it starts to click. But I promise you, as you do it more, you will get better at it. I apologize for this video possibly not being the best, but there's been so many things going on that have distracted me. And, you know, right before this, Diego, my third cat, who's never been in a video, actually came in the office to say hi to me, which was unusual because he often does not ever do that unless there's food involved. So Diego makes a sighting, who knows? For the next video, I'll probably tackle something else connected to writing and issues that students tend to have with writing. So, you know, if you have any suggestions, please, you know, either email me or, you know, leave a comment or whatever you kids do these days. Until next time, be good.